When it comes to water purification, there is no single solution that guarantees 100% safety. Water treatment is a game of risk management. You want to find that sensible middle ground that significantly reduces your risk without forcing you to carry multiple backup options or wait hours for a drink. This video will break down the options so that you can decide where your risk appetite sits. It's important to remember as I go though, that the pros and cons of each option that I weigh up are not always equal. A quick, lightweight solution means nothing if it won't protect you from the main things that will actually get you sick. First up, it's important to note that not all untreated water will make you sick. In fact, a lot of it probably won't. The problem is you can't know this just by looking at it. You can look at the factors that might contribute to it, like are there animals around? Is it flowing? Does it look clear? But these are just ways of understanding the possible risks, not actually deciding if it's safe to drink. That's why it's important to have a simple solution to treating water that you can use every time to limit your exposure and reduce your chance of getting sick. But the biggest factor in judging how thoroughly to treat water shouldn't just be about getting sick, it's about the consequences of it. On an overnight trip near civilization, a stomach bug is an inconvenience. On a remote multi-day hike, it's a potential rescue operation. There are three main ways to make water safe to drink: boiling, filtering, and chemical treatment. Boiling is the safest, but takes a long time, is the most involved process, requires plenty of fuel, and is quite inefficient generally, especially once you consider the cooling time. I'm not going to cover it in a lot of depth here as it's fairly self-explanatory, and I don't see it as a practical option for most hikers. It is a great backup option though, when you come across water that you deem to be particularly risky to use together with filtration for extra safety. Filtering is probably the most common treatment method for hikers, and for many reasons, it makes the most sense. At least as a first step in a treatment approach for riskier resupplies. There are multiple types of filter though, with the most common being a hollow fiber filter, but there are also purifiers which remove viruses as well. These are usually heavier, more expensive, and in my opinion, generally overkill within Australia, so I'm also not going to cover them in a lot of detail here. Hollow fiber filters are relatively lightweight, basically instant, as well as having the benefit of removing visible contaminants, making the water you drink a lot more palatable. They are also chemical free and therefore don't impact the taste of the water, so they can feel like the cleanest option. While they can be a decent initial investment, they should end up being the cheapest over time. Most importantly though, other than boiling, they are the most effective against Protozoa, which is probably the most likely thing to make you sick. That's why I say that filters make the most sense. They're the best at protecting you from the most common risks. These include Giardia and Cryptosporidium, both Protozoa, which is what these filters are rated to remove at levels of at least 99.9%. Remember when I said water treatment was about risk management? While 99.9% sounds like a super high number, it won't remove all the cysts that can get you sick, and it only takes a few to get you sick. So if you're going to be drinking a reasonable amount of water from a single source, you may still want to consider using another method, unless you use a filter that is rated significantly higher than this. Beyond 99.9%, it's easy to dismiss the difference in levels of protection, but each additional 9 added onto the end accounts for an improvement in safety by a factor of 10 times, which can be the difference between safe drinking water and getting sick. Different filters also last very different amounts of time before the filter clogs, so this is another factor to consider in your choice. There's too many filters on the market for me to go through them all here, but for reference, I personally choose a Sawyer Squeeze due to the longevity and relative safety it offers, with Protozoa protection of 99.9999% compared to just the 99.9% required to meet the standards. The main negatives of filters is that they don't remove any viruses, require looking after, can lead to contamination if not used carefully, and they can slow down over time as they clog. While this sounds like a long list, with care and good risk management, all of these negatives can be fairly easily remedied. The first point around viruses probably jumped out to you as cause for concern, and that makes sense. But in Australia and a lot of places with relatively pristine wilderness areas, viruses actually aren't a major concern. They usually come from places with lots of human contact, so it's worth researching where you will be travelling to see if this is a concern for your trip. If you're drinking water somewhere with lots of people swimming, for example, virus protection could end up being a great idea. Looking after your filter does require some effort, but it isn't actually hard. While on trail, regular backflushing will help keep the flow rate high, as well as ensuring that it doesn't freeze. Now, freezing causes any water inside the filter to expand, which damages the fibers, which are what keeps you safe. If your filter does freeze, most filters don't really have a way to tell if they're impacted, so you'll need to replace it, and not trust it in the meantime. How you store the filter is also super important. For the Sawyer I use, backflushing when you get home and leaving it in a saline solution is the best option, but always refer to the manufacturer's instructions for your specific filter. When filters do clog up, soaking them in vinegar for around 30 minutes, followed by forceful backflushing, is often the best option. But again, refer to the specific instructions for your filter. Now, contamination is fairly easy to avoid if you know what you're doing, but it can be easy to make a mistake when you're tired, which could lead to a bad time on trail. To avoid this, make sure you know which bottles or bladders have had untreated water, and make sure you never use these with clean water. Also, avoid contaminating the clean end of the filter with dirty water, so only use treated water when backflushing on trail. Once a bottle has been contaminated, the best way to decontaminate it is with a chemical purification method. Although, be careful, as it's often the water on the outside of the bottle and around the lid that can cause contamination. This is where chemical treatment comes in as the perfect backup, and is something that I will always take with me in case of any issues with contamination or filters blocking up. Chemical treatments usually consist of either tablets or liquids. There are multiple brands that specifically make water treatments, which I would recommend over any other solutions that you might hear about. Tablets are a simple solution, make it super easy to work out how many liters you can purify, and make dosage impossible to mess up. Liquids can be lighter and sometimes end up cheaper, but they do open up the opportunity to misjudge how much you have left. While these treatments have the added benefit of removing viruses, they're actually less effective against cysts like Giardia and Cryptosporidium. They take a minimum of 2 hours to remove these, and even then, they're not as effective as filtration. In even slightly murky water, these treatments become less effective again and also slower. So to be completely safe, you need to wait a long time with these options. That's why I'd recommend that you use a filter before these options anyway, unless you're filling up from clean water, such as on a hike with tanks at each camp. As well as the long wait time and being less effective against some protozoa, other negatives of chemical treatments include changing the taste of the water, being unsuitable to people with some medical conditions, becoming expensive over time as you need more and more, and not actually removing any of the debris in the water. With all of this in mind, the best way to stay safe in Australia and places with similar backcountry conditions is to always treat your water. A filter offers the best protection against the riskiest cysts, but is a slightly more involved process, including backflushing and storage, while a chemical solution can add extra safety if you deem the water source on the higher end of the risk scale. On its own, a chemical solution works when treating clear water, but takes a lot longer and is less effective against the main things that could get you sick. They do offer virus protection if this is of major concern where you are. Boiling water is the best option in extreme cases, but due to its inefficiencies is not really a practical solution in most cases. When judging the riskiness of water, the main thing to consider is what's upstream. If there is heavy industry, agriculture or mining, it's worth avoiding the water source entirely. While it may not make you sick immediately, there could be toxic waste that can cause much bigger problems down the track. This is something you should research before your trip and plan your water resupplies accordingly. If there are animals, especially farm animals nearby, it's less likely that there will be harmful contaminants in the water, but the risk of cysts is increased. This is where it's worth double treating water with a filter and chemical solution to reduce your risk further. If you're in a wilderness area with very few contaminants, the water is flowing and looks clean, or if you're taking water from a tank, this is where you may make the risk assessment that only filtering is necessary. In this setting, you may well meet someone who says the source is fine to drink untreated. Do so at your own risk. Pro tip, if you have water from multiple sources, Use the safest for drinking and the riskiest for cooking. Boiling your water again provides that final layer of protection. When in doubt, play it safe. You're much better off wasting a tablet or 10 minutes of filtering than risking a week of illness.